So I wanted to take you right into my classroom, just to give you a sense of what it looks like. This is my classroom as of 2004, the first time I ever walked into it. Typically, I have 200 to 400 students at a time. And I've been doing a lot of reflecting on the difference between that classroom now and that classroom today. So let me just take you back to 2004 and just remind you what things were like back then. Things were actually quite a bit different, and I was kind of surprised as I started really reflecting on this, just how different things were. For example, if you go back to 2004, you'll notice that, well, you can't really see it there, but there's no Wi-Fi in this room in 2004, which actually made a huge difference in the way I taught. There was no YouTube, Netflix, or other high-quality digital content anywhere. There were few laptops, fewer cell phones, and no smartphones. So smartphones didn't come around until 2007 with the iPhone. And that really changed the whole nature of the room. In fact, the only significant technology in the room is this thing up here, which gave me control of over 1 million pixels, and I'm the only one who had control over those things, which made me pretty interesting relative to everything else in the room. That's not the case anymore. So fast forward to 2007, and there was literally something in the air, and that something in the air was Wi-Fi access. And that Wi-Fi access represented, from an anthropological point of view, we like to think really big and understand the significance of these little things. This is nothing less than the digital artifacts of a billion people connecting and collaborating all over the world in ways they've never connected and collaborated before. And that's now permeating the classroom, and that would undoubtedly make a big difference. And so I decided to make a video about this in 2007. And I just started, I live in my head I was recently a grad student, and being a professor of anthropology, I think a lot about text. And I was thinking about text as how it's unilinear when it's on paper, but when it goes digital, things start to change. And so I just made this video just kind of tracking like how things had changed. And I'm speeding it up here because it's kind of nerdy through the middle here, but it's all about how there was a shift in code during that time from the old HTML to XML and then new forms of HTML that separated form and content and allowed people all over the world to connect and collaborate in new ways, so that people were being linked in these ways that really made us have to question all kinds of things. So I ended this video with a call to rethink a number of really basic things. And of course, along with all of that, I also thought we really need to rethink our classrooms. And so later that same year, I went into my classroom and I just decided to kind of do this little video about kind of what the room was saying versus what was going on in the digital world. And so if you think about from the John Dewey perspective of students learn what they do, and you ask yourself, what are the students learning when they're sitting here? One of the things they were learning was that the information is up at the front of the room and that they should follow along. No matter how subversive what I was saying might have been, they were still like learning this sort of authoritative approach to knowledge. And so I decided to create a Google Doc, and I invited all of my students in to collaborate on this. And the simple starting question was, what is it like being a student today? And then the students just jumped in and we started editing this thing together. And you can see a bunch of blank spots there. The blank spots were places where we needed a number, so we needed to survey ourselves. And so we did this and then essentially wrote this script together, this message. If you want to see the whole thing, that's up on YouTube. But clearly, there really was something in the air, and it was changing the way that I was teaching. And I started experimenting with new technologies and really trying to get a grasp on what all this meant. And I was really inspired by Seymour Papert, who was, had been working on this stuff since the 60s and thinking about how educational technologies could transform the way we teach and learn. And one of the things he had this idea in the early 90s that by the early 2000s, he predicted that there would be what he called the knowledge machine. And the knowledge machine would be this interconnected web of information. Like he really imagined this before anybody else had really seen it in reality. And he imagined even like tablets, and he imagined children being able to walk up to tablets and call forth any information from anywhere, and then be able to upload information. He really saw this coming. He called it the knowledge machine, and he said it would be the most astounding knowledge machine on the planet, better than any library ever. But he said the problem is the knowledge machine will only work with questions. And if people don't have good questions, this knowledge machine will become the world's most seductive distraction device. And after 20 years since he said that, it appears now by 2014 that it was apparent to me that the distraction device had won. So when I came into my classroom in 2014, you can see it's all updated and looks quite nice, but there were a number of new challenges in the midst of this. There were extremely seductive distractions all around. There was absenteeism on the rise. There were mental health issues on the rise. There was this whole world of alternative facts, ideological pluralism, and filter bubbles, meaning that people were basically seeing their own stream of information that was based on their own ideologies rather than seeing outside of those bubbles. In the midst of this, there was growing economic insecurity, rising costs, and shrinking budgets, so that there was really kind of this triad of crises. And the three crises were, one, a crisis of funding, another, a crisis of trust, and another, a crisis of significance. And overall, there was this, people were losing faith in the institution. It was, in a sense, like this great storm had been brewing. And in the meantime, this other alternative world was emerging, this digital world. And to the layman who doesn't understand how complicated teaching and learning is, it looked like this was offering a free, high-quality, on-demand, socially relevant, personalized alternative to what higher ed was offering. To a lot of people, this looked like the promise of a cheaper and better alternative. And that actually makes higher ed a tougher and tougher sell, because all around us, there seems to be free information and really great learning opportunities. So this makes this classroom look increasingly out of date and too expensive and not relevant. So these were my challenges, and to really bring this home, there were some real realities personally for me in this regard. One was that I was personally witnessing more disengagement, despite I thought being a better lecturer. I thought that I was in my prime now, and I was just a beginner in the old days, and now I should be so much better. And yet, one of the things I can point to as evidence of this is that in the back of the room, there's these doors, and the doors have this latch that's very loud. So you just hear this throughout the time as students come in. And in 2004, I remember a day I was teaching, and 10 minutes after I started lecturing, I heard the door go, and I watched the person come in. I watched where she sat down. And then after class, I approached her, and this is a room of 400 students, and I just said, hey, that's kind of distracting when you come in late. Could you try not to do that? And we just, talked it out, and it was fine. Now when I teach, I just hear this the whole time that I'm lecturing, people are flowing in. I teach, 8:30 in the morning on Monday, so so you can imagine why. But I can also tell you in 2004 that didn't happen, and so something has shifted. There's falling attendance, fewer majors. I'm teaching essentially in the humanities, social sciences. Budget callbacks. This is worse than just budget reduction. This is when they give you a budget and then they actually call it back. And in the meantime, numbers matter. Numbers matter more than ever, and that has to do with how much budget you actually get. So these were the new realities I was facing. And as I was facing this, this is in a way almost an existential crisis. There's a chance that us as anthropology at Kansas State University will not continue to exist if we don't get our numbers up and continue to perform well and so on. And so I decided to do what any good anthropologist would do, and that is actually study the situation carefully, and that meant doing participant observation. If you're not familiar with participant observation, it's basically, this is an example from my fieldwork in New Guinea, where I started 20 years ago. And you can see this is kind of a mess here. This is late at night. First night I arrived in New Guinea, they're having a big dance. And if you just observe this, it would look like some sort of exotic thing that you sort of stand back and you observe it and you try to understand what the deep meaning of this dance might be and so on. But The reality is, as an anthropologist, is you have to involve yourself in it and actually participate. So after several years studying there, you can see I was there on the right, dancing along. And one of the things I realized was that when I first started, I thought that the dance was kind of silly, like you just bounce up and down and you just hit your drum really easy. But you'll notice when you look at my back here, you'll see that my tail feather isn't going anywhere. And then there it starts to go. And it's actually harder than it looks. You have to really like pop that thing, to get your tail feather going. And then once you get your tail feather going, like all the women are circling around and they'll grab at the tail feathers and pull the guys sort of flirtatiously. Pretty soon, like, people are pairing off into the woods and you realize, oh, this is not just a like sacred thing, this is also a great party. And, and you would never get that if you weren't participating. So participating is essential to anthropologists and it became a central part of what I wanted to do as well. So as I was thinking about participating and trying to understand the learning process that my students were going through, I was also being a dad. And I was watching my son learn to go downstairs. And there were a number of things that struck me about his learning. One was that he seemed to really love doing this, even though he was failing over and over again. And then you can see this is recorded over a series of months. And this is his big brother coming in and sort of bopping him around. But it doesn't matter. He just keeps on getting up. And you can see him growing here, like he's quite a bit bigger here several months later. And he still doesn't have it. And then finally, he gets it. and like any great learning experience, it's not like you get it and you check the box and you're like, yeah, I got an A. It's like you just keep doing it. It's fun. Like this is part of life. So I decided to go at my new endeavor, which was to immerse myself in the life of my students, try to understand what was going on by following the 3 rules of George. This is George's 3 rules. 1 is to try new things. 2, it's all practice. 3, failure is fun and fascinating. You learn so much from when you fail. And ultimately, there's sort of a trust in this, because seeing George actually grow through this, I realized that growth is real, even when it might seem like life is too hard to really see through the forest of it all. So the first thing I did was I started handstands. And handstands was nice because I needed something physical that I could actually measure my growth with, just something as a reminder that learning does happen. But that ended with a wrist surgery, so that didn't work out. And then that's my that's my left hand, and fortunately I'm right-handed, so then I took up drawing. And drawing has always been hard for me, so I just took a sketchbook and I started drawing. And my idea was I was just going to try something that's hard for me and go through that difficult process of learning and kind of reflect on what learning is like so that I could empathize with my students. One of the things about my own history with drawing was that I was really bad at drawing. I don't know if it's evident here, but one of the things I reflected on early on was just how I'd gotten discouraged from drawing because it really wrecked my GPA throughout my entire life. Not only in high school, but then I took a drawing class in college because that's how much I love drawing, and it wrecked my GPA again, and then I just gave it up for 20 years. And it struck me that our grading system, there's certain problems in that. If you're like an F or a D, like I often was in drawing, you feel very disenfranchised. You don't really feel like you're a part of it. It feels like it's not for you, and you give it up. And if you're an A student, and I've been A students in other things, and one of the things I remember doing, and I see my students doing, is you sort of calculate just how hard you have to work at the end of the semester to keep your A. Rather than actually throwing yourself into something you love, you just sort of strategically go about seeing what you can do to get away with the A. And that's also problematic. So that was one track of my research, was just sort of getting into learning and drawing and so on. The other track of my research was to look back at old pictures like this and find the people in those pictures and go talk to them. And as I did that, at this point in my career, I'd taught about 6,000 students, and there were only 4 anthropologists out of 6,000. So first point is to point out that I'm not training future anthropologists, and that should affect how I teach the class. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to see what does an intro class in anthropology have to do with their future in any way. So I sought out people who are in all walks of life, and one of the people I talked to was a computer programmer. He's a very successful computer programmer, and I wanted to see what did my class have to do with anything in your life, and what mattered out of my class. And he ended up telling me a really interesting story. And at this point, my drawing was getting a little bit better, and I started animating. And I decided to animate his story. And so he told me this story about how when he was in college, he was very bookish, and that's why he was such a good student. He was an amazing student in my class, but he said he felt like life was just kind of passing him by. And so in my class, one of the things that he remembered most was that we had talked about the hero's journey, this idea that all over the world we see this series of stories unfolding in which people go through a road of trials and then they're transformed. And he said in the class he actually met a young woman who had been on a road of trials and was transformed. And when they met, they were like the perfect match. She showed him things that he had only imagined. They ended up raising a kid together, and I thought this was going to be happily ever after until he wrote me a few years later. So he said that after that, he just started running. And he would run day and night, sometimes 20 miles a day, just trying to think through what went wrong. And he would run through all kinds of weather. For months and months, this went on, just running. And he said he'd often run barefoot just to feel the world. He felt like he was kind of numbing himself in every other aspect of his life. And then one day, he said he just felt like he was lifted outside of his body, and he could see himself running through the park. He was just looking down on himself as he ran through the park, and he saw this little guy running through the trials of life. And for the first time, he had this immense sense of compassion come over himself. And he looked down on himself and he thought, my goodness, you're a hero. But it wasn't like you're a hero and like you're better than everybody else. Instead, he was running around the park seeing heroes everywhere. And it was this sort of opening up to others and seeing the best in them, and that we're all going through this road of trials, that gave him that wisdom and compassion that ultimately healed his relationship. And he said that's what mattered about my class. Thanks. So then I was talking to all these other students, from 10 years ago and so on, and I started kind of documenting patterns that I was seeing, and patterns between like students who were very successful and students who hadn't been very successful. And that made me turn to this body of literature on student development theory. And I'll just compress student development theory here into like a 1-minute thing here. Student development theory basically suggests that students go through a number of stages when they go through college. And when they come to college, they basically have this worldview in which the world is made in black and white, and their job is to memorize the answers. And when they come to college, they get really frustrated sometimes because professors pose questions. And they see these questions as posed because they think, come on, professor, you know the answer. Just give me the answer so I can memorize it for the exam. But eventually, they start to realize there are real controversies. And in fact, that most of us are operating in a world of controversy. That's what we're at the edge of our disciplines where there is lots of controversy. And eventually, that expands even farther, because when they're in the world of controversy, they still think that if they had the right theory or enough information, that they could get back to that world of black and white answers. But after a while, they start to realize that in the real world, it's full of ambiguities, and that there is no necessary road back to the clear black and white answers. A lot of times, ambiguity first occurs in their real life, like some part of their social life, but then they also start to see it in their academic life as well. And our job is to usher them through that ambiguity, to give them a sense of comfort with ambiguity so that they can emerge into this sort of state of wonder, where that ambiguity actually looks like a world of opportunity and possibility. And this is a critical moment, so I decided to look more carefully at this stage of ambiguity, which is a big part of college life. And that led me to do interviews not just with alumni, but also with current students. So what I did for this part of my research was I just had open lunch. And the rule of open lunch was If you come to open lunch with me, there's no small talk. We're just going to dive right in and talk about really big stuff. And as we did that, I started to realize that this ambiguity, this ambiguous space that they were living in was often dominated by three big questions. And the three big questions were questions like, who am I? What am I going to do? Am I going to make it? And so basically, questions of identity and purpose and sort of this idea of whether or not they're going to make it. And just to give you a sense of some of the stories that populate this world of ambiguity, like one student came in and told me, she said that when she was 8 years old, she was sitting in the back seat of her car, and her little brother, who was 6, was sitting beside her, and her mom was doing flashcards. And her little brother was beating her on all the flashcards. And she just had this voice come into her head at that time that said, "You're not smart." And she just kept that identity with her all through high school. And she just played the pretty girl who wasn't smart all through high school. And then she came to college and she said, "Dr. Wesch, I've been faking it so long, I don't even know who I am anymore." And she wanted to explore who she'd be if she stopped playing the person who's just the pretty girl and actually tried to exercise her intellect in a more forthcoming way. Another student told me about how when she was younger, in 8th grade, her parents broke up. By 9th grade, her mom was out partying and on drugs and sometimes wouldn't come home at night. And then one day just stopped coming home altogether. And so here she was in high school, and she was too ashamed to tell anybody at school that her mom hadn't come home for several weeks. She was getting bills and eventually actually got a foreclosure notice. And she's like, "Man, I'm going to be homeless." And she goes to class that day, and she's acting out in class like she often did. Her English teacher took her out in the hallway to deal with her. And she just started crying, and she said, "I don't want to go on anymore." And that English teacher took the time to hear her story. She actually went home with that English teacher, lived with her ever since. She graduated valedictorian. And then she was sitting in my class as an accounting major, but she hates accounting. And she said she was an accounting major just because she didn't want to be homeless ever again. Like it was a clear career path. But she was wondering, what does she really want to do? What is she going to do? And then another student, just to give you a sense that like this isn't just like troubled students, even some of the best students are messing around with this ambiguity. And one of my best students ever handed me a note card after class one day and said, "I know you think I'm doing these great things, but I need you to know that I'm running away from a household of anxiety, suicide, and depression. And the harder I push, the more it feels like I'm wrapping myself up into the cycles that are going to take me down." And she was wondering if she's going to make it. Another student, a lot like her, also very like an all-star student, came to me and wanted to discuss whether or not he should go on in college at all. He was thinking about dropping out. So these are the types of big questions that are populating their lives at this time. And it's not hard to go back to that time in our own lives and remember just how challenging that time was. But what happens when ambiguity becomes overwhelming is that a lot of students collapse back down into this world of black and white answers that they came in with. And our challenge is to move them past that, because if they go back to that simple world of black and white answers, that's where they practice that sort of strategic learning, and they're really only developing a routine expertise, which is good for problems they've already faced before, but the world isn't full of those types of problems. Instead, we have to usher them through this ambiguity into that world of wonder so that they develop this sense of deep learning, which develops adaptive expertise, which will allow them to actually engage in the real-world problems that we know they'll be facing. And not just real-world problems at work, but the real-world problems of marriages and life itself. So that's what that sort of wraps up that part of my research. But in the midst of that, because I learned like these new I had this new sense of what my purpose was in this big class. But in the meantime, it's a big class because we're all scrambling for SCHs. I don't know if you guys have that term around here, but SCHs is like all the rage because the more SCHs you have, the more funding you get. And so we're all scrambling for SCHs, which drives classroom sizes bigger and bigger and bigger, which makes it a lot more difficult to develop SLOs that are meaningful. And this leads to a sort of problem, right? Because SLOs, like there's sort of this inverse relationship between being meaningful and measurable when it comes to SLOs. And oftentimes we end up somewhere over on the very measurable but not very meaningful side of things. And so just to give you some sense of this, in anthropology, I read one of my favorite articles by John Komaroff at University of Chicago, and I decided to summarize his vision of anthropology as, he lists it here as holistic, you use critical estrangement, you map processes by which social realities are realized, etc. Let me just translate those into student learning outcomes. So this means students must be able to identify multiple dimensions, connections, and causalities, see beneath surfaces and beyond appearances while attempting to transcend biases and assumptions. In order to map processes by which social realities are realized, we have to understand how we co-construct the world. We have to see the world both big and small. We have to identify, apply, and shift perspectives. We have to sit in the immersive ambiguity and uncertainty of a messy problem for an unknowable length of time while slowly giving birth to a meager little insight, treasure it for a moment, and then throw it away. They have to imagine their way into another's perspective, embrace it, even if or especially if it is contrary to their own, and they have to understand themselves as culturally and temporally bounded entities mired in cultural biases and taken for granted assumptions they can only attempt to transcend. Those are real, meaningful SLOs, but they're not very measurable. And so, so this is the problem. And just to give you a sense of where this all goes, a lot of times this just devolves into questions like this, like the smallest class of sound that makes a difference in meaning is it just doesn't matter, right? Like this is not what my students were telling me mattered to them 10 years after school. Is like, they remembered what the smallest class of meaning that makes it, et cetera. I don't remember what the question was. That's how important it was. So this becomes the problem, is that this nexus of SCHs and SLOs, you end up with kind of a crisis of significance. Like the stuff that we're sort of driven to teach isn't necessarily the right thing to be teaching. So I went through this process after this first part of my research where I'd done these alumni interviews, and I took a notebook and I wrote down like a list of my lectures and the structure of my class, and then I just tore it apart. And that whole notebook became filled with new ideas of what it would look like to start over. And one of the things I realized was, if you look at like the typical topics of a big class like that, typically, there's these 16 topics. There's 16, not because that's like some, like magic number. It's just that's how many weeks there are in the semester, right? And what I realized was that over the 10 years I'd been teaching, I'd struggled every day to make that stuff relevant. And in the process of making it relevant, I'd actually done a lot of intellectual labor in making it meaningful and significant. What I really needed to do was elevate the meaning and significance out of that and get away from the topics, and so start with the meaning rather than with the topics. And when I did that, I realized that I was really kind of developing almost like an ethos of anthropology. What I really wanted them to be able to do was ask questions, make connections, and try new things, see big, see small, see it all. I wanted them to see this as a science of human beings with the art of being human, word weaving and world making, understand that we shape our tools and our tools shape us, recognize the realization of reality, practice empathy, develop a global consciousness, overcome fear, hate, and ignorance, and understand ultimately that we make the world. That was the big vision. And in the process of all this, I ended up like passionately actually just rewriting the whole textbook myself. And I just wrote this mostly just from the lectures I developed, and then just put it up online for free, because that was the other big problem was, expensive textbooks. And I just want to give you a sense of then where this goes. Is I ultimately then realized that I almost had like a manifesto of what I was trying to teach, like these really full of these big ideas. And I listed these 10 big ideas in succession. I realized this really is like a great story, and I wanted to invite them into that story. So let me show you now like how the class starts. Like this is on day one. I introduce them to the syllabus, and I read the syllabus to them, and this is what it looks like. So, people are different. These differences represent the vast range of human potential and possibility. Our assumptions, beliefs, ideas, ideals, even our abilities, are largely a product of our culture. We can respond to such differences with hate and ignorance, or we can choose to open up to them and ask questions that we've never considered before. When we open up to such questions, we put ourselves in touch with our higher nature. It was asking questions, making connections, and trying new things that brought us down from the trees and took us to the moon. Our most basic assumption. Our most basic assumptions are embedded in the most basic elements of our everyday lives, our language, our routines and habits, our technologies. We create our tools, and then our tools create us. Most of what we take as reality is a cultural construction, realized through our unseen, unexamined assumptions of what is right, true, or possible. We fail to examine our assumptions not just because they are hard to see, but because they are safe and comfortable. They allow us to live with the flattering illusion that I am the center of the universe, and what matters are my immediate needs and desires. Our failure to move beyond such a view has led to the tragedy of our times, that we are more connected than ever, yet feel and act more disconnected. Memorizing these ideas is easy. Living them takes a lifetime of practice. Fortunately, the heroes of all time walk before us. They show us the path. They show us that collectively, we make the world. Understanding how we make the world, how it could be made or understood differently, is the road toward realizing our full human potential. It is the road to true freedom. So that's like the sort of over-the-top opening to the class to kind of get them involved and understand that this is a sort of a narrative and a way of thinking that I'm trying to draw them into. And so like I said, the book is just freely available online. They can buy a printed version if they want. But this solved one of the big problems in the class, which was just a far too expensive textbook. So we've got a pretty good starting place here. I felt like I sort of changed the sort of reason for the class, the core reason for the class. But there were other issues I had to address, and that was this lack of engagement. So I just want to draw your attention to this guy here, and I'll just zoom in on a different day to give you a sense of what he looks like. This is David, and he slept in all of my classes, or if he wasn't sleeping, he was looking at me like this. And so this was my experience of David, and he took all of my classes, which was really confusing to me because it didn't look like he actually enjoyed them. And so I made a little animation about our story together. So one of the things that I know some of you can relate to is teaching in a big classroom. You kind of notice like even little things that people do, and when you see somebody sleeping, it can be like really devastating. And I've got this amazing 2 million points of light and a laser pointer to dazzle them with, but it just never matters with him. And in one of my classrooms, I actually have 4 screens. I literally dance on tables, and it still doesn't work, and it just makes it all the more heartbreaking. And so this is just the basic feeling I have. So one day I just got really mad at David and decided I was going to do something about this. And so I'm just going to pause for just a second and just remind you that I'm also in this, the 3 rules of George are still in effect, and one of those rules is it's all practice. And there's something actually like really centering about that. So even in this midst of this moment where I was really angry, I had the presence of mind to change my tune and invite him to lunch. And so we went to lunch together, and I asked him why he slept in my classes, and he said he was addicted to games. But he wasn't just addicted to playing them, he also made them. And he started telling me about this game he made on hexagon cards that involved mythological figures, and I started to realize he actually knew more about mythology than I do, and I teach a class on mythology. So I started to see him a little differently. I started to realize that the classroom had sort of pinned him in a certain way and defined him in a certain way, and he started to see himself that way too. So I invited him to be part of an experiment, a class where we would have no lectures, and no textbooks, and no grades. It would be a class where we could bring together all kinds of people who are just seeing their newfound skills, and we could bring them all together to develop something cool, a way to redefine ourselves. So ultimately, we ended up creating a video game together, and he worked all day and night, became a real hero of that process, and I started to see him and other sleepers a lot differently. And just to give you a sense of what we did, we created an empathy game about living with Alzheimer's, and to do this, the students actually lived in a retirement community and then created a 3-dimensional model of that retirement community. You walk through it, and you have these memories come back to you as you walk through it. So that process was pretty fantastic and was really like a laboratory of thinking for me in my teaching. Like being able to work with a small group, and this retirement community actually let them move into the retirement community. They gave them a meal plan so they could hang out with the residents. And they lived there all semester. And it was just this really powerful experience for everybody. And you could really see both the students and the residents changing over time. So that's at 1 a.m. actually. That's how many. And the students would learn so much. So they're basically sitting down with these residents, hearing their life story. Let me just give you a sense of what this looks like through one of the student projects that was produced.
I was born November the 12th, 1931.
No, I was born in 1934.
I was born in 1923.
I was born in 24.
Mother had all us children at home. Doctor came out and delivered us.
We were all born at home, no hospital.
I was born and raised on a farm.
Middle of the road, dryland farm. Dad always kept it up.
That was a very innocent time of my life.
So I'm just going to speed it up a little bit here. It's a 9-minute video, but you see what they've done. They've actually gone out and found the places where these people might have lived or gone to school. They kind of developed this empathy for them by going through their life story, going to war, coming home, raising a family, and then ultimately retiring. And then eventually one of them has a fall that leads them to be in the retirement community.
When you're a caregiver for a long time, it runs you down.
He went to sleep that night and never did wake up.
And he died the last part of January. He just died in his sleep, basically. He just looked like he always did. But you can't get him back.
That was hard, because I really, really missed him.
Boy, I missed him. It just hit me that way. He wasn't here. To live in this world,
You must be able to do 3 things.
To love what is mortal,
to hold it against your bones,
knowing that your own life depends on it.
and when the time comes,
to let it go.
let it go.
And these types of projects, I mean, they're amazing in themselves, but what's really amazing is seeing how the students change over this time. So after that project, this is Jordan, who is one of the creators of that project, and he was also one of those great students who was thinking about dropping out. And after that project, he decided that he definitely wanted to drop out of school. And so he dropped out. He sold his car, bought a bike, and started riding south through Oklahoma, then Texas, and into Mexico, rode into South America, or Central America, and lived with a Mayan family for a while. And during this 7-month process, really figured out what it is he wanted to do, became very passionate about it, came back to school. He wrote a series of essays and won a Marshall Scholarship, one of the most prestigious scholarships in the world. And when he came back, he reminded me of the joy of doing anthropology, actually like putting yourself out there, doing real field work, learning about people and their lives. And this, of course, is what got me so passionate about anthropology. I wanted to share that not just with these small classes where I was doing this in a sort of a small setting, but I really wanted to bring it out to my big class. And I wondered how I could do that. And so I presented it to my big class, and I said, that's the only way to really live anthropology is to live anthropology. And I came up with this, we had the sort of manifesto that I read to you. I was like, but we have to put this into action. Somehow we have to really live this. And it's like, that means we have to do real field work. And so their challenge back to me was like, well, why don't you do some real field work? And that real field work can be among us. We'll just take you out. And I thought about this, and I thought, I have 3 small kids. I haven't seen the hours of 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. for 10 years. It's like, okay, cool. So they decided to take me out for the night, and I was going to take you to like the key moment. If you're interested in the whole journey of that night, if you go to life101.audio, we documented the whole thing, and you can hear it like as a podcast. I'll just take you into this main moment. So I put on my little undergrad student disguise, which was a hat backwards, and and then headed out. And of course, just like in New Guinea, where I want to like join in the dance, that I'm sort of facing that same sort of trepidation and challenge. But the dance is pretty complicated stuff, And I would love to join in, but I'm feeling like, I don't know, I'm actually feeling really out of place, obviously, in this environment. And eventually, this guy dances up to me, and he's going to be kind of my guru for the night. So this is Ming Shin, and I, like a good anthropologist, I not only like participated in dancing with him that night, but also like interviewed him and all those types of things. I wanted to like share a little bit of his story. If you're wondering like how this guy from China ends up in a bar in Manhattan, Kansas, I asked him, why did he come to K-State? So why did you come to K-State?
That's a really funny thing. This city called Manhattan, right? I thought the Manhattan, oh, that's really cool. Manhattan, big city.
Yeah.
Yeah, in New York. No, okay, I said, yeah, okay, Manhattan is, yeah, cool. They sent me here.
Oh, man. So, and he told me about just how hard it was when he first got here. He experienced like really severe culture shock. And he just basically locked himself in his dorm room and tried to learn English by watching YouTube videos.
Because my English is not good before I come here. So I just stay at the dorm, watch some videos, play the games, and I didn't go out, didn't talk with anybody. And I just stay at the dorm and watch the video and try to learn.
You can actually hear like this moment of transformation in him, and this is, sort of the key here is we're trying to go for this transformational learning. So at this critical moment in his life, he's like just holed up in his room and not really getting out there, and he's watching these rap videos basically to like learn how to speak English. And his favorite song was Eminem's "Lose Yourself," and this song like really spoke to him. And I'll just play a bit of this. This is during the interview. He just decides like he wants to like rap this song for me.
The first song I learned, the Lose Yourself. I can sing a little bit. If you had one shot, one opportunity to seize everything you ever wanted, one moment, would you capture or just sleep?
And he told me about how he used to just sleep, because he's so depressed during this time.
His palms are sweaty, Lee's weak arms are heavy, there's vomit on the sweat already, more spaghetti, he's nervous, but on the surface looks calm and ready to drop bombs. But he keeps on forgetting what he wrote down, can walk crowd goes so loud, he opens his mouth, but the words don't come out, yeah.
And then he told me about how, that was his feeling over and over again when he first got here. It was like he'd open his mouth and the words wouldn't come out. And then we started talking about what it's like to lose yourself, and he said, at that time, he felt like he had lost himself. That when he was in China, he was like this really outgoing guy, and he had this totally different personality. And everybody here saw him as like this sort of closed down introvert, and that really wasn't him. And it took him a while, but he says here.
Yeah, after 1 year, I think, that you should talk with people, and you should, like, that I think after 1 year, I changed it back.
And he found this mostly through dance.
Music, dances, it's an international language. Yeah.
And he learned dancing the same way he learned to talk. He learned it through
I always watch
videos.
some videos, like some really cool guy, they dance on, and they record themselves. So I always watch famous rappers. They move really like nature, like free.
So one of his like best moves is he'll kind of copy somebody across the room. So there you see Adam sort of flailing around, and then you go back to Ming Xin, and he's doing this really smooth thing. And here Ming Xin is actually doing my dance, which is apparently just wearing a hat and hiding from everybody. and they kept doing this all night, sort of trying to call me into the dance. And just so you know, like what's going on for me is like, again, like I'm sort of intellectual, like live in my head, and I just like could not move. Gosh, I mean, I'll take you to the final song here, or the second to last song.
Everyone has to be out of this area by 2. So 7 next 5 minutes.
So this is like really my last chance to lose myself and like immerse myself in the experience. And you can hear them like coaching me here.
Just move your arms. Come on! Come on, move! Show me how to move!
And I'm just standing there like kind of bobbing back and forth, you know, like I don't know if you know this song, but like again, being an intellectual, I just was like analyzing the lyrics. And as like a happily married, 42-year-old, it just didn't really resonate with me. I don't know if you know the words here, but it's like I had to beep that part out, but it's like I only, you get it. And I just couldn't feel the music, right? And then I look over at Ming Xin, and Ming Xin's like doing his thing where he's just kind of dancing with everybody in this really amazing way. And I just felt this sort of freedom and just moved my arms just a little bit. And once I moved my arms like past here, it was all good. And I was just like, fine, and I just had like this great night, the rest of the night. And it struck me in reflecting on that you can't just think your way into a new way of living. No matter how long I spent thinking that night, it wasn't going to happen. Ultimately, you have to live your way into a new way of thinking. And that became like, that phrase that came to me that night became like a manifesto for everything I did in the classroom from then on. It became like a thing I could model everything on. I started to realize that that's why Jordan had to take off and drop out of school and travel south. It's why Ming Xin had to come out to the bars and find his groove in dancing. It's why I had to come out to the bars. And that was 2016. 2016 looked like a really good year. So not only had Jordan just won the Marshall Scholarship, but their film, which you saw a brief bit of there, made it into a film festival in Paris. They flew to Paris to see this. But again, yeah, the product was great, but what they became was so much greater. And so just seeing them go through that process of living these lives and then translating them into their own, Kinsey found that she had this passion for sustainable proteins and actually started an insect farm and started selling insect protein online and had a very successful little business going. And now she's at the University of California, Santa Barbara as a PhD student. She went to Thailand to study how I know this sounds like really strange stuff, to harvest insect proteins, but it's become her passion. And it's a long way from the person who was that 8-year-old girl who thought she wasn't smart. So that was a really good year. And in fact, it was like literally a banner year. K-State, because of Jordan's success and Kinsey's success, put us on banners everywhere. So if you walk around campus, you'd see pictures of us. And we were sort of the headlining group for the Innovation and Inspiration campaign, which is this $1.4 billion campaign for K-State. And as a result of that campaign, the College of Business has this great new building. The College of Engineering has a great new building. They have these awesome water fountains. I see you guys have 2 of them down the hall here. Meanwhile, this is what our water fountain looks like in our building. And this is our internet speed, in case you're curious. But even worse, 2016 was also the year that we lost 2 faculty, and they weren't being replaced. This was like a realization that all of those dire predictions about the future of higher ed were suddenly making themselves known to me in a way that I didn't really think was possible. I thought, no, that's not actually going to happen here. It's not going to happen to us. And then here it was happening. This was truly existential because that curriculum that Jordan went through and Kinsey went through was no longer available. We can't actually cover that curriculum with the 5 people. We could do it with 7. We can't do it with 5. And so we were in big trouble. So in 2016, we were told that if we taught online, we could increase enrollment, we could pay for the lost lines ourselves. And instead of, this would be a time we could protest. Protests weren't going to do any good. There's no money. And all we could do was do our best. And so I suddenly was thrown into teaching online. I've always been, I've used a lot of technology in my classroom. I've never actually taught online. So I was ready, though, to use George's 3 rules and to remember that growth is real and just go for it. So I approached this with 3 guiding principles. That I wanted to create something that was sort of anthropology for everyone. That's actually my colleague, Ryan Klataski, came up with that phrase. He was going to help me do this. And we wanted to create something that was literally for everyone, meaning like anybody in this room could get on there, or people in Papua New Guinea could get on there and find something meaningful. We wanted it to be open, accessible, and free. At least a version of it would be free to everyone. We wanted to see what it would look like to create the world as a classroom, and we wanted to embody that principle of sort of you have to live to learn, or you can't think your way into a new way of living. You have to live your way into a new way of thinking. And so this is day 1. Alexa, what's on the calendar today?
Today, there is one event remaining. At 6 a.m. there's record anthropology class opening video.
So the idea is to basically integrate anthropology everywhere, show that anthropology is everywhere, and just kind of make it a part of everyday life. And so this opening video, I strap on the rollerblades, and then Katerine mentioned this in the opening. I decided to show how human population and change was changing exponentially by speeding down this hill, and then I wanted to show how fast the population shift has been. So I tried to turn this corner here, and that didn't work out. So back to rule number 3, failure is fun and fascinating. This was all done in the summer, because we find out we're losing these lines, we have to make money fast. And so I created this thing in the summer. I had to create 24 videos in 40 days. So there was no time to lick my wounds. I had to get right back up. And the next lecture was I wanted to show how there's this great research now, and you've probably seen some of this, but on just how humans are sort of built to run and how we can run a really long way. So I wanted to show what that was like, and just demonstrate our abilities to run. So I decided to do a lecture that would cover at least a marathon, if not more. And so here I am kind of carrying the camera, flying the drone, and running all at the same time. And the idea here is to kind of...
We're going to have to run a really long ways to make this happen, because I got a lot to show you. First, we're going to go right over there.
So then at each location, I can sort of reveal a little bit more of the lecture.
Over there, across the bridge.
What a wonderful world.
And then way over there. It might be something like 41 miles, I'm not sure.
So the plan was to run 41 miles that day. Not that I'd ever done that, but I was just going to try. And so then this is mile 17, and it got really windy, so couldn't hear anything, and that also ended as a failure. So this is just day after day, and I'm trying to produce these videos for this class, and then finally I end up producing some stuff, and we're off and rolling. And so these lessons are all posted on anth101.com, free and open. And then, I've developed all kinds of new ways of teaching out in the wild. And so instead of, I don't have a PowerPoints, and so I use a bandana sometimes, which keeps my lecture notes. I learned how to fly a drone and lecture at the same time. And now a lot of this just looks like fun and that kind of thing. But I want to say we've had some really great breakthroughs in this and realizations. And one of them is that, for example, when we covered racism, now there's a lot of great documentaries out there on racism and structural racism in this or that community, but there's not anything really much about racism specifically in our community. And to be able to take these concepts that students might hear about in other contexts and apply them directly to the community in a way that they can see was really powerful. And by making it free and open, it also had a big impact on our community. So when we studied, when we did like a history of structural racism in Kansas City, just to show like why Kansas City is so segregated to this day, that video ended up touching millions of people. 2 million people in the Kansas City area saw that and became sort of a catalyst of discussion about racial issues in Kansas City. And so I think there's something really quite wonderful about getting our stuff out in public where people can assess it and then talk about it. So this was a really great moment for us. And then we also wanted to not just have great lessons that were available to everyone, but also make these into a transformational experience by getting people to actually live these lessons. So every lesson, you can see there's 10 lessons, but then there's also 10 challenges. And so each lesson is paired with a challenge. So lesson 1, pretty simple, people are different. And the challenge 1 then is to talk to people who are different, talk to strangers. And so we do everything on Instagram, and people just use hashtag Anth101. So if you go to hashtag Anth101 right now on Instagram, you'll see thousands of posts. And a lot of those posts are people like reaching out to strangers and talking to strangers and meeting new people. That's challenge 1. And a lot of these are quite powerful and moving. Here you can see a student went to Walmart and just caught this couple on a motorcycle. He says, "What's your favorite thing about being in love with each other?" And he says, "This." Then he starts up his motorcycle and rides off into the sunset. Or this one, also in the parking lot at Walmart. She says, "I'm pushing carts now to get in shape for my surgery. I'm donating my kidney to my sister." He says, "Wow, you're a hero." "No, I'm no hero. Just making my world a better place like I'm supposed to do." He says, "I met Leia while she was frantically trying to save the life of a baby bird whose wings had gotten crushed by a shopping cart. Then I looked at that tattoo on her arm." So it's things like this that connect students to the people around them, their communities, and then sharing those things really creates a sense of community in the classroom, even if we're spread out all over the world. So then like lesson 3, which is it was asking questions, making connections, and trying new things that brought us down from the trees and took us to the moon. Students actually try new things and reflect on what it's like to try new things, reflect on their own learning. And this is often something physical, like it could be trying to do a backflip, or it can be any number of things. And you can just kind of see the different types of things people do there. Some people pick up musical instruments. Some people try exercising or different types of things. They just try to hold themselves accountable for 28 days. We call it the 28-day challenge, and try to learn something new during those 28 days. Now, a lot of people like to do instruments, and so, rotate, land. You can see people actually do learn over the 28 days, which is nice. And so, of course, I'm also involved, and so this is me trying to learn the violin on day 1.
I almost had the first 2.
And that was supposed to be Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. This is day 4. And then this is my colleague Ryan, who's joining me here. We started a little band. We call it the 28-day band. So that's day 7. And then day 14, several students start to join us. And the idea is that on the 28th day, we'll actually play for the whole class. And so here's day 28. And this isn't just us, but because we give away this class for free online, there's intro courses all over the nation that use it, and then we have a back end where we share best practices and we share discussion questions and all kinds of stuff. It's amazing the type of synergy you can get and all the sort of wealth of insight and information you can get by working together across the whole nation. Like, we're all teaching this class together in a way, and it creates a really amazing experience for us. So then finally, that also leads me to this third guiding principle, the world as classroom. And realizing that the students are spread out all over the world, there was really no reason for us to be locked in Manhattan, Kansas. And so we took some of the extra money we were making, and instead of just paying TAs to stay in Manhattan and grade, we sent them all over the world.
My name's Ben, and I'm in Jakarta, Indonesia.
Hi, my name's Matt, and I'm in Barcelona, Spain.
I'm Amy, and I'm headed to Samoa.
I'm Darren Wilkinson. I'm here in Zambia. Let's go, Zambia. Let's go.
If you're officially enrolled, you have been automatically assigned to one of these TAs. And so obviously this is great for them. They get these like life-changing experiences wherever they may go. But this is more than just that. Like if you look at like Garrett's opening video, so he's the one who went to Zambia. Let me just show you a brief clip of this and show you like what he was actually doing in Zambia.
So welcome to Zambia. I'm here in Kabwe with my friend Nick, working on a USAID project for maternal and child health.
So anyway, he worked on that. He ended up connecting with Paul Farmer at Harvard and ended up also winning a Marshall Scholarship based on some of those experiences. So these like transformational experiences are another piece of what we're trying to do as well. And this also then adds to the lessons. So when we get to lesson 8, and we have the lesson is we are more connected than ever, yet feel and act more disconnected. We want to show how we're connected globally and how we often don't see that or feel that. And so at this point in the semester, a lot of our little Amazon Echo that you saw at the beginning, the Alexa, had become sort of a character in the thing. And so we decided to figure out where she came from.
Hi.
Hi, Alexa. Where are you from?
The company that made me, Amazon, is based in Seattle, Washington.
And of course, she wouldn't actually answer like who made her and where she was from. So we had to start from the ground up and sort of look at the components and look where they were from. And we were able to like have people around the world, like Garrett, then look into like where the actual materials came from.
We also have Garrett in Africa, starting from the ground up, actually starting with where the materials come from. He's going to be looking at mines in Zambia.
I'm here in Kabwe, Zambia, at Black Mountain, one of the most toxic sites in the world.
And then another one that we recently did was my suit. And so this is a suit that was made in Vietnam. And we happened to have a TA in Vietnam. And I thought, okay, I could have my TA do that. But then I also thought spring break was coming up. So I took the whole family to Vietnam. So this is just like 2 weeks ago. We actually just got back a couple weeks ago. We just took the whole family to Vietnam because one of my TAs, Ben, is now based there. So this is like quite an amazing switch from where I was teaching in Manhattan, Kansas, to now I'm basically like teaching all over the world and traveling around, meeting up with my TAs. Poor Wilson threw up like 30 times on the way there, as you can see. But then, you know, we go out and we try to find like who made this suit that I have. Do you know that brand? No. This goes to a store called JCPenney's.
But this is also our products. You know, we product this, but they put the label on it.
Oh, right.
So we don't know it.
So you make it and then you don't know who puts the label.
Yeah.
So, all right. He actually takes me out to his factory where they produce suits, and some of those suits make their way to the States, and he doesn't know what they're labeled when they get here, but he takes me off to see and meet some of the people who are actually making these suits. And again, this is just like such a great experience for the students who are, I'm posting some of the stuff back to Instagram, and then they can send questions, and they can find out things that they want to know while I'm actually out there doing this stuff. And then of course the students are also doing these things, so their challenge is to actually try to find somebody who made something that they have, and they have to use Skype or any other way that they can to connect with people around the world. So ultimately, this is just all about trying to get them to experience difference, experience differently, and experience more. Ultimately, seeing that learning anthropology is really a shift in disposition, a new way of being in the world. And so lesson 9 then gets them to kind of reflect on this stuff, noting that memorizing these ideas is easy, but living them takes a lifetime of practice. And these heroes show us the path. By lesson 9 and 10, we're trying to get them to face the challenge of really seeing themselves as a hero and crafting sort of a heroic future for themselves. And just to give you a sense of what this looks like, some of these students are themselves kind of traveling around the world as they take the class, or they decide to travel the world while they're taking the class because they get inspired by it. And here's a student, a non-traditional student, which is another great thing about this is you often reach out to student populations you wouldn't necessarily reach out to. So here's a 27-year-old who had kind of come back to school after a career in marketing, and here's what she had to say.
Just compounding these 10 challenges into 8 weeks has just like super awakening, and I didn't expect to be that to happen. Like, I'm 27, like I've gone out to the world and I've experienced things, but yet still like this 200 level anthropology class has like given me like tools to sort of deal with things that I either didn't know I was still dealing with or have not dealt with completely or in a healthy fashion. And like that is worth every cent I've had to pay for this class.
So here's what it all looks like then from the numbers perspective. Ultimately, in this little flurry of experiments, we were able to increase enrollment by 825 SCHs a year. That brings in about $378,000 in revenue. We were able to fund 14 study-away experiences for students, $1,000 to $5,000 each. On student evaluations, the students give us a 4.7 to 4.9 out of 5.0. We increased our majors by 10%, and most importantly, as of last week, we just hired 1.5 new lines. So we're back, and like we can actually have that curriculum that we want, and the water and Wi-Fi works. so everything's fine again after this sort of rocky go for a little bit. Now, much of what I said isn't necessarily directly relevant to your particular situation. In fact, I would guess that none of my answers would be right for you. But I do want to encourage you to do the following, and that is the same thing I encourage my students to do. Is like the art of anthropology is really asking questions, making connections, and trying new things. And so what I encourage you to do is just ask some big questions like, what are you really trying to teach? And try to create meaningful SLOs, like really get at the core of what you're trying to do. Secondly, go out and make connections. And by that I mean like really connect with your students. Take them out to lunch, just talk to them deeply, and also talk to alumni. And then finally, just try new things. This is probably the most important thing that I did. It just put me in the right mindset. Try something that's hard for you and remember the pain and joy of learning. It doesn't have to be anything actually relevant to your teaching. It can be handstands or swimming or drawing or whatever it might be. Those things can all be valuable. Study the learning process through this experience. Like remember what it's like. Remember how hard it is, but also how joyful it can be. And ultimately embody a growth mindset, and you'll probably carry that over to your own classroom. Thanks.
At this point, we'd like to open it up for any questions for Dr. Wesch. Maybe they don't want to ask you any questions.
If everybody's taking the class, I mean, so how is, some people are taking the class for pay.
Yeah.
Does that work?
Yeah, so, right, so some people just take it for fun, and so that was actually an interesting design problem for us, is we wanted to create assignments that are so interesting that anybody would want to take them, even if they're not doing it for credit. And so yeah, lots of people just do the challenges just for fun, and then some people are actually paying for the credits. So yeah, but everything is free and open online, so if you want to essentially take the class for free, you can do that. Yeah?
I guess, so you got this money from SCHs, but did this not open up development funding? I mean, wasn't this used to try to get donors?
Well, so, right, so the question then is, so it brings in tuition dollars, but then isn't part of the idea also to bring in donations and so on. Yeah, certainly we'd like to bring in donations. That hasn't happened yet, but I could see it happening. I think it could happen. But we, you know, every school is different in how they incentivize different things, but we are currently incentivized to do online, so we get some of that money directly back, which is what allows us to do the 1.5 lines. And I know you guys have had that situation in the past, but maybe not now. So these things are always changing, and, but yeah. Yeah.
Innovative teaching is certainly wonderful, and everything you said I would agree with. But the trouble is that in top-tier universities, the reward system is completely opposite. Basically, if you are a good researcher, you publish in top-tier journals, you get lots of grant money, it doesn't make any difference how you teach, because you will be rewarded beyond your expectations. If you're an excellent teacher and don't do the others, you'll never get tenure. So it's very difficult for the older faculty to try to mentor the younger faculty into trying to do a good job for teaching. So essentially, good teaching becomes a matter of just basically wanting to do a good job rather than sacrificing the time that's needed.
Yeah, that's certainly a problem at Kansas State as well. I mean, we have the same sort of reward structure. It's also really hard to identify good teaching, whereas it seems easier to quantify research. So a lot of the tenure cases are all bean counting the research rather than looking at the teaching. So I recognize all of those problems for sure. Yeah, I don't have any like direct answers to solving that problem, but yeah. Yeah.
Your time frame in terms of, so you had the inspiration, then you began to build it, and now it's sort of matured. So what's the time frame up to that point? What's next?
So we basically launched that about a year ago. So everything you saw just happened in the last year. It started summer, not even a year, 11 months. And what's next is we haven't even publicized the course yet in any way. So all the courses that are joined in with us just found it by chance through Google search or something like that. So we'd like to actually do a little advertising, maybe get more intro courses involved around the country, maybe even like seed some high school courses and things like that. Basically, this comes out of a passion of thinking that these basic lessons of anthropology are really important for everybody. And we'd like to spread that as far as possible, and we're not looking to make a lot of money out of it. It's nice that we got a couple lines, so we can keep doing what we're doing, but our core passion is just, anthropology for everyone, trying to get this kind of mindset out to as many people as we can. So. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so that's part of the other development plan is so right now we have a Google group and we provide sort of teaching tips and quiz questions and discussion questions. And we actually, if you use an LMS, we even package whole, or I say we, really it's just me right now. But I have a whole Canvas package if you're using Canvas. So you can just take that as a template, throw it in Canvas, and you've got your whole course populated just as a starting place. But yeah, one of the goals moving forward is to also do little videos just for teachers to kind of show them how to use these things, but also give them some basic tips about how to build a course and how to teach and so on. Yeah.
How can a TA in Zambia do the TA stuff, and how's the internet going to work?
When the TAs are abroad, how does the internet work?
When they're abroad, how can they do anything?
Well, you'd be surprised at how good the internet is around the world these days. I mean, when I was in Vietnam, I always had faster internet than I have in my building. Not sorry, K-State, but yeah, Vietnam was better. Yeah, China is a problem, and so in China we've had a TA there, and they VPN, but that's comes and goes, and so we always have at least one TA back in the States who kind of is a fallback just in case, because it's not just internet access, it's also we've had illnesses, we've had laptops lost, we've had all the kinds of things that can happen when you're traveling happen. So yeah, so we have backups.
So I'd like to thank Michael and join me. It's Paul here.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you so much
Thanks.
for your time.